And Tehran's retaliation against the U.S. killing of the Iranian top commander Qasem Soleimani has now come with airstrikes, as we reported just a short while ago, of 2 military bases in Iraq. But now there is a real danger waiting if the situation could get out of hand. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has called the missile strike a slap on the face of the United States and said that Washington's troops must leave the region. Listening.
حالا یه سیلی دیشب به اینها زده شد. این مسئله دیگری است. این کارهای نظامی به این شکل کفایت اون قضیه رو نمیکنه. اونچه مهمه این است که بایستی حضور فساد برانگیز آمریکا در این منطقه منتهی بشه، تمام بشه.
So, major escalation there in West Asia. David Roches, professor at the National Defense University, is now joining us live from Riyadh for the latest on this. Professor, thanks very much for joining us this evening. Now, we believe that Iraq had given some prior notice about the Iranian strikes to America. And where do you think we really are in this escalation? Some reports are suggesting that Iran on purpose did not hit potential American targets inside the U.S. air bases. It wanted to send a message, a warning, but nothing more than that.
Well, I don't even think it's a message of warning. I think that they felt for domestic purposes and because they had, been so aggressive in their rhetoric that they had to respond in some way. But because President Trump laid out pretty clearly that there was going to be a decisive response to any further American deaths, they chose, first off, very isolated bases. And secondly, they chose isolated parts of isolated bases to ensure that there wasn't any damage, there wasn't the ability to escalate, but at the same time they could turn to their people and say, you see, we've stood up to the great Satan.
Mm-hmm. But do you think then that this gives an opportunity to the U.S. government and Trump administration to sort of pull back from the escalation as well, given the fact that I want to quote here that the foreign minister of Iran tweeted in the early hours of Wednesday saying that we did not seek escalation of war, saying that the missile strike essentially was a proportionate measure in self-defense and not something that was bound to be escalatory.
Yeah, and President Trump's Twitters have also been along the lines of saying, okay, this is done, it's over, let's draw a line on it and move forward. So I think your assessment is right on. I think that we have actually de-escalated, and there's been a few other measures. For example, an Iranian tanker which has been operating without its guidance system on, trying to presumably avoid detection for months, just turned its guidance on. I think naval analysts say that this shows that Iran is through threatening the Strait of Hormuz in the short term, at least.
Right, in the short term at least. But there are, of course, Iranian proxies all over West Asia and the Middle East.
Yes.
Now, Iraqi Shia community is now asking for an attack on Americans in the wake of Mohandis's death, along with General Soleimani's. How do you think the situation is going to play out inside of Iraq?
Well, so the Iraqi Shia militias are under greater or lesser degrees of control of the Iranian government. Abdulmadi Mohandis' militia, the Kateb Hezbollah, was one of the most lockstep Iranian-directed militias out there. So the people who are, responsive, part of those militias, they're going to continue to seek an American withdrawal, or they're going to seek to attack Americans. But the attack on the Kateb Hezbollah, it's forgotten. That was in retaliation for rockets that were launched at American bases that killed Americans. And that American presence is there at the invitation of the Iraqi government. So I think what we've seen is not just a deterrence dynamic established with Iran, which has been effective, but also a new deterrence dynamic with the Iraqi militias. The problem is that they're not as well controlled, they're more fragmented. So, there'll probably be some low level of violence.
Mm-hmm. Right. And, of course, the Iranian envoy to India here has said that he doesn't mind an Indian negotiation between the United States and Iran. Do you think other players like France and, other European nations also playing some sort of role in any forward negotiation between Iranians and the Americans?
Well, there already is a formally established group of JCPOA signatories called the E3. So France, Germany, and the UK have been seeking to moderate these the tensions between the United States and Iran, and also seeking to find ways to help Iran achieve economic benefits as long as it keeps its nuclear program in check. So the Indian good intentions, I think, are appreciated. India has a long history of negotiating, going back to the Cold War. During the Korean War, soldiers of my regiment who were held captive by the Chinese were freed as a result of Indian negotiations. And at least I've never forgotten it. Soldiers in my regiment have never forgotten it. But here, I think that this is probably something that's not needed or just won't be as useful as we could hope.
Right. So, of course, status quo at the moment. Let's hope what happens next. We don't know. Donald Trump will hopefully or presumably be tweeting in a few hours from now. Professor Roches, thanks very much indeed for joining us and sharing your thoughts tonight on what this escalation means for both sides.